All right, looks like we've got a good number of people already joined. We're so excited to have over 250 registrations for the webinar today. So thanks everyone for joining, and Courtney's going to kick us off.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. Thanks, everyone. Welcome. We have a disclaimer. Hannah and I are both in Austin, Texas, which is currently going through a snowpocalypse, more like an ice apocalypse.
Round
So
two.
if either of us lose power or anything, we have some backup plans. Thankfully, Hannah and I are in different locations, so the probability of both of us losing power at the same time is low. But just FYI, hopefully our internet and our power holds up. But yeah, so Courtney O'Donnell, I'm the Senior Manager of Business Development at Flo Recruit. This is my colleague, Hannah Kelly. She's a Senior Manager of Employer Sales. And we have the wonderful Lynn and Kevin. Lynn is the Assistant Attorney Recruiting Director at Crowell Moring. And Kevin Donovan is the Senior Assistant Dean for Career Development at UVA Law. We will give a little bit more extended introductions, but just wanted to kick off by introducing everyone. And thank you again for your time.
Awesome. All right, getting into the agenda for our webinar on candidate journeys today. As Courtney mentioned, we're going to go into deeper introductions with Lynn and Kevin. Thank you guys again for joining. Then we will dive into the meat of the content today, which is looking at candidate journeys then and now, pre-2019, and today what we're seeing in 2023 in terms of the touch points and timeline for law student recruiting. We'll also have plenty of time for a discussion on these timelines, journeys, as well as audience Q&A. And then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways.
Awesome. So some housekeeping. Please use the chat to say hello. Some of you have already done it. Feel free to drop in where you're calling in from. Use the Q&A to submit any questions you have. Feel free to submit those throughout our conversation here. We will have a dedicated Q&A at the end, but happy to answer any questions if it makes sense in the moment. And a recording will be emailed out to everyone. So if you or your colleague need to drop off, a little bit earlier, we'll be sending it out to all the registrants. So be on the lookout for that.
Fantastic. Let's get into it. Thank you so much for being here, Lynn and Kevin. Welcome to a Flo Recruit webinar. We hope it's going to be a fun discussion today. Wanted to give you guys a chance to tell everyone who's joining today a bit more about your careers and background in legal recruiting. And we'd also love to hear from each of you, just for fun, your favorite thing about your job. So Lynn, would you kick us off with a bit more about your career?
Sure. So hi, I'm Lynn. I have been in legal recruiting since the year 2000. I am now at my third firm. I joined Crowell in July of 2022. So migrated with a lot of my colleagues at different firms and schools over the last year. Previously, I was with Hogan Lovells for just under 15 years and was with another firm before that merged into a different firm during the last downturn. I came into recruiting so accidentally, as many people did. Someone told me I would be good at this and I didn't know what it was, and have had the wonderful opportunity to learn and grow and develop over the last 20 plus years.
Amazing. Is there anything standout favorite about your job?
My favorite thing about my job is that it combines, you get to use all parts of your brain, but for me, it combines analytics, people and social, and strategic thinking all together. And, you might be switching those throughout the day or at different times of the year. So, but I love the people, and that it's every day is a new beginning, and it's all about beginnings, which I love.
Fantastic. We love the people as well. What about you, Kevin?
So I was a lawyer before I did this. I was in practice for 19 years. I clerked out of law school for a year, and then I practiced for 19 years as a litigator at a major firm. I was a partner in the last 10 of those. And then unlike Lynn, nobody told me I would be good at this, but I did apply for this job, and I've been at UVA for about 13 years now, running the career side of the house. And I love a lot of parts of the job. Actually, I really like this job. I like working with the firms and the recruiters in particular, our alums. But the part I love best is this. I love working with the students. They change every year, and they kind of keep you young working with them. it's a great part of the job.
Amazing. All right. Well, thanks for a little bit more context there, guys. I know that everyone who has joined today is very excited to hear from both of your perspectives a bit more about what candidate timelines and journeys are looking like this year. So to start diving into the content, Courtney's going to tell us a little bit about what we even mean by a candidate journey.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. And thanks, Lynn and Kevin, again, for your time today. So what we mean by a candidate journey is, how candidates conduct research and learn more about your firm and employment opportunities at your firm. This can be via them actively engaging with your firm via virtual or in-person events, the candidate applying for a summer internship or a full-time opportunity, the candidate then accepting, or even rejecting your offer. Just having that interaction and the journey through the employment process, starting in their first year and going until their graduation. And eventually, this will include the candidate re-engaging, hopefully years later, as a lateral attorney. So we're kind of meaning that beginning to end, and we're going to work on this timeline you see here. So excited to kind of talk about how that's changed over the last couple of years and what it looks like now.
Awesome. So we are breaking up this timeline into sort of the past journeys. What did it look like pre-2019 and maybe even further before in terms of the touch points with candidates over this roughly beginning of their 1L year through to being hired for a rising 2L position. So we're going to show that past timeline or old timeline down below versus a modern candidate journey, what we're seeing in 2022, 2023 up above, so we can compare them. And you can kind of think of those months as the columns of, all right, in August, for example, what were we doing and what are we doing now? Spoiler alert, there's a lot more going on now. Okay, so we've also chunked this out into periods of a few months at a time, so we're not getting overwhelmed by the whole thing at once. So we wanted to kick it off with a look at the first touch points with students. So roughly August through October, what's going on campus? And largely this timeline is meant to convey a student perspective. So they've got classes beginning, maybe they have midterms at their school. And pre-2019, what we saw was students being pretty focused on the kickoff of classes during those first few months and not having a career services orientation and starting to think about and research employment opportunities until a few months in. Versus up top, of course, today, we've got networking, touch points, engagements happening almost from day one, which it seems in a lot of cases has pushed up that career services orientation, since students need to be prepared from almost the second they step on campus to be engaging with employers. So I'd love for Kevin to kick it off with a bit of your own experience. You actually let me know in prepping for this webinar that you at UVA moved that orientation up. So what has it been like to shift that timeline for your students?
I think it's been really good. I mean, when I came into the job, we were in a world that was kind of very lined up around the NALC guidelines, and the changing of the guidelines isn't the only thing that drove this. Like there was just a market move toward kind of engaging in a different way. And when we took a look at that first year and the fact that we weren't really actually starting to talk to students about their careers until, like, we talk a little bit at the orientation, but until October 15th or shortly before the November 1st start date, we realized we were just giving up a lot of bandwidth. Students have limited bandwidth for this, and they actually have more headspace at the beginning than they do when they're a month out from exams. And so it was challenging. And so the move back allowed us to kind of catch them and give the things they had to learn in the first semester in smaller chunks in August and in September and into October, so that when firms, our start date for firms to kind of interact with them is early October. By the time we got to that point, we felt comfortable that they were ready to have 1L interaction. So we've been really happy with the move forward. It's challenging from an office standpoint because callbacks are going on with the 2Ls and stuff, but we're happy with the way it's going. Great. And Lynn, from the employer perspective, in the fall of 2022, or maybe even in years prior, has part of your strategy been to get on campus earlier? And what's that shift been like?
I think from the employer perspective, yes, I think that, you want to be there. You don't necessarily want to be talking to law students from the perspective of they are candidates. You're looking at them as this is our first opportunity to introduce ourselves and to introduce them to things that they don't know about. So you're just making first impressions, and there have been increasing opportunities to do so. And in some respects, even before they start school, if they self-direct it.
And in your experience so far, have those first engagements been by sending attorneys to campus, by sponsoring student groups? Are they virtual interactions or webinars? What are some of the formats that's taking in the early stages?
So all of those, right? It could be as easy as just, sponsoring the orientation for the new law review members, or being there to introduce them. I think an example I have is that with UVA, I have prior experience we even helped out with admitted students functions. So because those admitted students could go anywhere. So, you're just thinking about, what is their full journey from beginning to end, which actually starts before they start. So yeah, there's a lot of sponsorship things. We're starting to hear from lost student groups earlier on that. And also just webinars, just having speakers show up at panels, sometimes career services, sometimes even professors inviting lawyers, just making sure we're aware of those things so that we know about all of the engagement that the firm might have at a particular campus, whether or not it's meant to be recruiting.
I'm curious, one more question for Lynn. I'm curious if, since your attorneys are involved in some of these engagements, speaking on panels, meeting students, if it took much communication from the recruitment team regarding, okay, this is happening earlier now, did you get any pushback on, wow, this is a lot with the timelines pushed up, or are people pretty receptive to it, understand?
I think you have to think about it from the perspective of, where you're sitting, right? It's different here at Crowell than it was at my former firm. And so you want to be mindful of their bandwidth. You just used a lot of that over the summer and in 2L recruiting. So it's, look at it as a ramp up and what will be the most effective at this point for the 1L. Is it effective to just get your name out there, or do you have to do more, something more intense earlier? What are they going to remember, and when are they going to remember it? And you don't always have to be first all of the time, but I think, yes, that you do have to educate the lawyers a little bit. It's not happening the way it was when they were in law school. And there are more opportunities for engagement, and really using that word engagement as opposed to recruiting, and asking them, when are you on campus? You find out that you have adjuncts, or there are things happening at the school. We might have relationships we don't know about, and just keeping track of all of it and reminding them to let us know, because we can, record some of those interactions.
Right. And we'll dive more into how you're recording those a little later on. Kevin, one more question for you. We hear a lot of great discussion around the efforts to make sure students are having an equitable experience in terms of understanding where and how they should be engaging to learn about employers and make connections earlier and earlier. And sometimes concerns around, okay, well, they don't know anything yet when employers are reaching out to them this early. So I'm curious your perspective there and what you've done for your students. I know moving the orientation up, but is that something you see happening or concerned about ever?
I think the point that Lynn made is a good one. Like, we really view the first semester as about education, not about like heavy recruiting. And so the events that we sponsor are, large multi-employer events where the focus is on they're virtual, using Flo actually. They're focused on pulling in people from different practices all over the country and setting up virtual conversations so that students can start to hear people talk about practices. They can pick up vocabulary. They can get comfortable talking to attorneys. It's almost invariably in small groups, so they're not in a one-on-one. During this whole time, they're involved in individual counseling to help prepare them for these interactions and to give them a sense of what's going on. And there's not a heavy focus. Like our main point for them, and this is the tricky part for us in dealing with firms. We want all the firms to have time to meet the students, but they only have so much bandwidth, and we need to guard that. So we need to be efficient and smart in the way we do things. So in the first semester, for instance, we don't allow off-campus events and receptions. For single firm events, it has to it usually works through a student group or something like that, because we would never have enough bandwidth to kind of let every firm come and do events that Career Services is putting on. So we do efficient events that are focused on education in the first semester, and that's the main focus. And then the second semester moves more toward engagement that is focused more on starting to narrow the scope of employers.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer what you're asking?
100%. And you gave us a beautiful segue into our kind of second chunk of time, where maybe we're moving away from education and into more serious interactions. So Courtney, you want to break down kind of this crazy time period for us?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Anna. So this is when the 1L applications, like she said, it's a little bit more moving from not passive engagement in education, but more to active. So they're actively applying to positions here. You can see there's a cute little shush emoji. What that means is that obviously Thanksgiving, the holidays are starting to roll around. So there's a little bit of a lull, and also students are preparing for finals as well and actually taking those finals. Big picture here is that the big difference between now and pre-2019 is that schools are becoming more active in hosting their own networking events, like Kevin mentioned there, that big kind of virtual networking event between kind of a meet the employers, meet and greet kind of event to solidify that education and ensure students are meeting employers, in a networking setting starting in October and leading into November. There's also the 1L screener interviews that are conducted in January. So you can actually see that timeline is moved up a little bit more. Versus, more of a later February timeline as well. This allows students to accept their 1L job offers a little bit earlier in the process than before. And it's becoming more prevalent also, a note that students are reaching out to attorneys. So they're trying to actively engage with firms that maybe they did narrow down with the education they received in the first several months as a law student. They're able to do a little bit more active engagement with attorneys to learn a little bit more about the firm's culture, trying to visualize themselves as an attorney at that firm. And then lastly, firms are becoming very present on campus, hosting events starting in March. So that really ramping up events in this timeline here. So a question I have for you, Lynn, is since attorneys are one of your biggest assets, and you had mentioned wanting to manage their time and allocate resources accordingly, they're your biggest asset in reflecting your firm's culture. How do you get buy-in from your attorneys so that they see value in engaging with students in these networking or engagement opportunities? If, for example, attending one of these events or engagement opportunity, how do you get buy-in from your attorneys there?
So it's a multi-pronged approach. I mean, usually it's not hard to get, attorneys to want to go to their own school in most places. So getting them to do it, it's convincing them to be thoughtful about how and when to do that. And that's where one of the things I mentioned up top about what I love about my job comes in, and that's the analytics. I like to be data driven, not solely data driven, but it's the analytics of the data that we have as to, what were the results, and how did we get this person, but also the people analytics, right? Getting the feedback from prior students, or particularly your most junior attorneys, like what is effective now as opposed to what was effective in the past. So using your summer associates while they're here as a focus group to be like, what should we be doing at your particular school? How can we be involved? Paying attention to the things that they want us to pay attention to. But then once you present any lawyer with facts, they are going to, that will help you in making the case. So you have to be strategic and then look at it and look at the school in particular. What is the culture driver? What are the culture drivers at this particular school? So you're going to have might have a different strategy for each school that you want to focus on, and then have an overall strategy that might work everywhere. And then really pay attention to the programs that you go to, track the things that you're sponsoring and attending, and the outcomes, get feedback from the lawyers as soon as they get back about not only the people that they met, but the event itself, and then use that each year to determine whether you should continue doing that and how much bandwidth should you throw at that particular meet the employers versus some, think for some gala or journal or something. And each thing will work differently for each employer. So what you have to just stand in is what makes sense here as opposed to what makes sense for the firm next door.
That's awesome. So many good points there. I love that idea of a focus group with the summers to kind of learn how was their process, and just constantly, getting and receiving feedback, I think is really important. So, Kevin, to you, with your students potentially reaching out to attorneys, obviously Lynn has to show value to those attorneys of like why to respond, like why does it matter to be super responsive? But do you have, Kevin, a couple of questions, maybe 2 or 3 questions that you offer to your students to ask the attorneys about the firm? What are some questions that you think could generate a lot of education and inform your students for making decisions for future applications?
So we kind of do this in 2 ways. Like we do have a lot more than 2 questions that we suggest as possible questions, but we really believe like that these conversations are like meaningful and helpful for both the attorney and the student if they are more organic and they're focused more on what the student is actually going to base his or her decision on. And so like one of our counseling types is networking preparation and strategy. And so students will come in and this will be the subject of a very specific conversation of like, what is it that you're going to be trying to make a decision on as you're deciding among firms? Well, these are, and we'll talk through things that they may want to talk to attorneys about and raise with attorneys. And then we find this is a really, it's nice because the students can fit it at the part of their schedule that works. Maybe over the break after the holidays, maybe they meet somebody at a home for the holidays reception and they strike up a conversation. They decide to continue it. But we really believe, like we try not to script with like here are the questions. We try to work individually with them to kind of come up with a plan that makes sense so that when they ask the question, it doesn't sound like they just read something off a card, right? Like this is something they care about knowing the answer to, and they look like they care about knowing the answer when they ask it because they actually do care about knowing the answer. We talk about trying to be really efficient with the attorney's time and understanding like how busy this person is and what a very positive thing they're doing by taking time out, when they could be billing $800 an hour to talk to you. So being efficient and smart.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I love how you're individualizing those questions because it is different depending on the student and what they value and what they want to seek out in a future employer. Lynn, quick question. You had mentioned about the getting your attorney's buy-in, presenting them with data and facts. We're not going to name any names, but we know if you put together kind of a PowerPoint or even a PDF one-pager, like, are they going to read it? What does that look like? So what's the medium of which you present this data to your attorneys to get value, have them see value, but also understand why it's important not to be billing $800 an hour and spending time, with these students?
I think it's, you have to have a few just quick facts that you can say in conversation. Obviously you're going to present to key groups, your hiring committees, hiring partners, depending on how you structure your recruiting, a school team, something like that, whoever's involved, more a deep dive of the data to show them, but you need to know the story. So you need to be able to, say off the top of your head, we want you to do this and present that value when you're making the ask, right? This is why this is important. We would like you to participate, and here's why I'm asking you, as opposed to anyone else as well. So personalize it for them, but also just say, be able to talk about it when you're walking around the hall. This percentage of student has indicated that they, that accepted our offer, that they had some communication with us or touch or met someone prior to applying for the job. I always know that answer at the top of my head. So I can then make the case that this is why we need to spend this much money and this much time at this particular school event program. Students from this event stay in touch. Students from this school are really good about engaging. So I think it's knowing those things, and it takes time, right? I'm still learning that in my new job, but I think as you build that knowledge, just be telling that story all of the time, and then they'll start telling it for you.
Totally. That's awesome. Thank you so much. All right, Hannah, off to you.
Okay, fantastic. That brings us into our final third of the year breakdown here, and we're actually overlapping with August and September again. So busy times there. I think what's interesting about April through August, in my mind, is it seems like this has always been known as the busy season, right? You know that OCI and callbacks are going to be happening, the receptions beforehand, the summer programs winding up, but it seems to have gotten even busier. And this is where we hear the most contentious conversation really around timelines shifting for these 2L engagements, interviews, and offer timelines. So what I kind of want to drill into is, as things shift up, what are the primary factors in the change that we should be aware of? For example, I think a big one I've heard about is the interviews overlapping with 1L employment. So maybe we start there, but I'd love for you guys really to point out the others that you think folks should be aware of and how you're adapting to them. So maybe, Kevin, could you start us off with speaking to one of those concerns, the 1L employment overlap? How do you advise students there, and do you see it having an impact?
Yeah, I mean, so we do advise students on that, and it's like our view is it's largely driven by how the 1L employer would react to the possibility of a student, taking a lunch hour to do an interview and then making up the time or doing whatever they have to do. And we kind of, regardless of what type of job they're in, it doesn't matter that it's a firm or it's a public defender's office, they still be able. So with a firm, we would say, if you're working at a firm, you're working for the firm that summer. And if you can, if you have a firm that wants to interview you and they're being flexible and they do it outside the workday, great. But you shouldn't be sitting at your job doing an interview for another firm. We find that some of the public service employers are flexible. Some say, gosh, no, we need you present here all the time. And we say, great, you're not going to be doing early interviews. And so be transparent with the firms that you're talking to or you've met during the year and are reaching out now, or that you were in a resume collect for early in the summer and they're reaching out. Be transparent with them about what is going on, that you are very interested, but this isn't a possibility during the working day in the summer. Others are quite flexible. Maybe it's a firm that has hired them and doesn't anticipate hiring them long term and knows that they're going to be looking for a 2L job, and they're saying, fine, you can do this as long as you're taking care of your work. And so we say be respectful of the employer, try to set things up in ways that don't conflict, and be transparent again with the employers that you're talking to. We haven't had a ton of trouble on this, and if we hear of a student who the employer is upset about something that happened, we find a way to gently bring that up, and it's a good learning experience to kind of understand why this didn't go super well.
That makes sense. Another sort of con I hear of the shift timelines, or that our team hears sometimes, is that the students just have less time in general to weigh options, continue relationship building, get their bearings in the hiring process. But as we've been discussing, there are all these new engagement opportunities that are also starting earlier, that hopefully the student has had, if not the same, maybe more relationship building and education. So I'm curious how you see that balance playing out. Do you feel like your students are at a disadvantage with earlier recruiting, or not so much?
I think the students are so much better educated about firms by the time they get to the summer than I was when I was a law student. It's kind of unbelievable, even compared to 10 years ago. They've just been kind of thinking about this throughout the first year in a way that we didn't. And initially, you see most students will still, at our school, most students will go through OGI even if they're holding offers from the summer. But we are seeing a growing number who will decide to take an offer over the summer, and almost invariably we'll always have a conversation with them. Are you sure about this? Are you sure you want to do this? It is someone who's really spent a ton of time, and they've talked to a lot of people at the firm, and they've talked to a lot of other firms, and they are confident that this is the right decision for them, and they made the decision. So, it used to be we fought that tooth and nail 5-10 years ago. We were kind of like, this is crazy. You have so many opportunities to talk to more people. A lot of times what we're finding now is they've talked to the people they want to talk to. They narrowed the list down during the course of the year. They came into the summer, and based on reputation and their interactions, they've got their list, they've had their conversations, and more of them are able to kind of make a decision. I still think we're at a time, like I wonder where OGI will go ultimately, but we're still at a point where we're still seeing a lot of jobs come out of OGI. So this is not, I don't think yet an either or. I think it is a continuum of recruiting that covers the whole summer in different ways. And as you noted, there are some candidates who just won't be able to recruit during the summer, and OGI will be the only time they'll be able to, including some of the students that firms would call the best students because of grades or other things that help them to get a 1L job that is preventing them from recruiting.
Right. That makes sense. Thank you. Lynn, on the employer front, to be one of those firms that the students have already talked to, if they're interested in you, how has it been trying to make sure that happens on earlier timelines while you're running a summer program as well?
I think that's really the challenge, right? We didn't get more resources to deal with this as it happened. So it's definitely been a challenge, and it's a journey to still try to figure it out. So I think just coming to terms with the fact that it's happening, right? And preparing yourself for that and figuring out what timeline makes sense and what candidates you want to focus on early, should you decide to focus on early. I think one of the things we learned last week at the NALP Summit from the student panel was there were students that weren't in the early market. There were students that were just focused on OCI because they didn't realize it. So, or that they should even be engaging with employers, even on an engagement basis during that time. So I think we all need to be a little bit more open to counseling students that they should be out there. So I think from my perspective, it's how much can we do and when, what are we actually capable of, and just paying attention, just remember, keeping your eye on what makes the most sense for your employer. Your lawyers are going to come back and be like, we heard X firm has already hired this many people. And, you'll have summer associates even who will say, I heard all the 1Ls already have jobs, and none of that is true. So, you might have to step away and go back and just remember what's actually, the fact. And that's that there's a lot more law students than there are jobs. And so, you will find the best people for your employer. So just keeping that on there. And I think as an employer who has employed 1Ls, just to kind of touch back on that, I just want to say that, being transparent with them that what they're doing, and making it comfortable for them to come to you and express if they do need to. Now that we're coming back to in-person things, the past couple summers have been easier because they have been able to do them virtually or at different times. But just as an employer, we need to remember that these students have jobs that might not offer flexibility, and we are impacting how those employers who will be on their resume see them, and that, but that also, like, our 1Ls, should we hire them, will also be in this bind, and that we need to be a friend to them through that, because that is brand building too, and it might help them to decide that they just want to stay with you forever. So how we treat everybody during this process is important. And I think a couple of the students mentioned that, how difficult it was for them, particularly at government jobs, to interview while they were working. So I'm going to be more sensitive to that going forward.
Right. I'd love to zoom in on a detail that I think you selflessly glossed over to talk about, being sensitive to others, which is that your team didn't get more resources to do really what can be more work to have all of these engagements happening, more networking, perhaps hosting your own screener interviews, whatever it looks like for a certain employer. So what are some things that you have found important to empower your team to do it all?
I think it's planning and preparation. It's being supportive. It's being willing to do whatever it takes myself to do that, even if it means, I'm reviewing 200 resumes on a Sunday. That's what I have to do. And, just knowing that during that period of time, it's going to be a bit of a pain. And we just have to get through it. But it's all about the preparation and planning. And the last couple of years have been really difficult on that because we didn't know how things were going to go. But I think what we do know now And we should prepare for that and just be ready and to know in advance what it is that we want to accomplish during that period of time, during the summer months, and how can we do that. So it's just being honest with the team about this is where we have to be and what we have to do, and just you just have to figure it out. I don't have any real anything I can share on how to do that. I know that summer is going to be hard. It always has been. It's gotten harder, right? There used to be a break. I don't see that on this. I think you're going to show that on the next slide.
Yeah.
There used to be a dedicated break back in the day, and now it's peaks and valleys. And so just being prepared to be that support, offer support, make it fun, create challenges around it. I went to a program once on gamifying it, so there's all different methods you can take to do that, but it's also just using the resources that you have to make it a little bit easier too.
I also think like efficiency, like working smarter, not harder. Like if you're going to take the time to participate in an event, and attorneys are going to take time off to either be on virtually or go to a school, it's more than just pushing brand out. It's pulling data in, right?
Yeah.
And if you come out of that and you don't have a list of 20 students who made a positive impression, you've let something really valuable go. This is an opportunity to figure out who really is really into you, and maybe likely to be worth an earlier interview if you can only do a few of those, right? And I think that's a big change in thinking, because when I was in practice, a lot of this was kind of you went and you tried to be friendly and you tried to answer questions. And I don't think when I was doing it, we didn't pull a lot of data in. We may meet somebody and say, oh, I want to remember this person. But I think really making, especially if you're doing a virtual event and you've got, the ability to be grabbing observations real time. I think that's super valuable in this day and age, because again, the students, you can't do 10 events at every school because you don't have the bandwidth and the students don't have the bandwidth. So if you make the most at a very interaction, and pull back these great impressions from your attorneys, I think that, Lynn could speak to this more than me, but I think that makes it easier to figure out how to prioritize the next stage where it should be going like this as you head toward offers.
Yep. And empowering the lawyers to making sure that they understand what those are. When you're hosting your Rising 2L receptions in June, if you do something like that, that you should then be using that as an opportunity to identify priority candidates, and then be ready to act on them. But empower the lawyers to make those recommendations to you, and then use that information. Or even if it's just, we're going to keep in touch with this person until we get to OCI, right? So there's different methods that you can do it, but it's keeping in touch with that person. It doesn't take a lot for a student. You only have to respond to them once, or have one conversation with them, and that will be enough and meaningful for them. My feedback that I've read over the years shows that they don't want to be overwhelmed. They're trying to sort it out, and they're researching a lot of firms. So it's the quality of the touch, and you can make those interactions, events, and make them fun for everyone involved too. But it is making sure that you're recording the feedback from those interactions on the lawyers are making, and making them meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Hannah, we have a good question I think would make sense here for Lynn. Someone asked about, your recruiters, are they doing both lateral and student recruiting? And if so, kind of how do you balance that when student recruiting is super intense seasonally?
Yeah, I think that's really hard. I will say that, I've been fortunate to be in places where there is a little bit of separation, but there are definitely people that are doing both. And unfortunately, sometimes that means that lateral can sort of be pushed to the side when it shouldn't be. I think, there are times when you are having to be all things at once. So you just have to, buckle down and do it, and just be transparent with the people that you're working with, particularly the lawyers, about we have all of these things happening. You just have to be honest about, what's going on, and make the case for resources in advance if you can. It might be an intern, it might be a temp, and I know that's hard to get, but, again, this is where data can help. You can pull together your data from the last 2 years if this was our volume, and, I need a person just to administrative help me even part-time. I'm not saying I've been successful at any of those things. I'm just saying that you have to make the case to do it. And so, I think I honestly, I think it's just using the information that you have to help you get what you need. But it definitely, the latter, all the things combining happens.
You guys have it's recruiters at firms, like you've done like an almost unbelievable job over the last several years with the heavy lateral recruiting, the 1L season stretching during your summer programs. I have to think that the trend is going to be toward larger recruiting teams. Like, I think that's going to be a trend line. We've seen that on the school side. I think it's going to have to happen on the firm side. I think the leadership will recognize. I think Lynn's right. Like, the more you can present data or better software.
Maybe showing someone this visual wild year-round recruiting where August and September are actually on there twice to make room for everything. Courtney, you want to speak to the year-round view?
Yes. I get stressed even looking at this timeline. Yeah, it looks like a lot, but what we've learned, especially obviously working at Flo Recruit, and I'm sure everyone on this call has learned in the past 3 years, that you have to make the most of opportunities and see things as opportunities, even if they're presenting themselves as problems and potential obstacles. So you may see this kind of shift in timeline as a problem, but at the end of the day, everyone on this call, schools and employers, they're invested in these students and we all want to see them excel. So I think having that kind of at the central part of it, and like Lynn said, come prepared and with data, there is a grander picture here, even if this timeline does look a little bit crazy. But one question I had for you, Kevin, kind of zooming out here, I know that you've obviously been a previous attorney and you have these relationships and these partnerships with firms, but let's say you have a firm that maybe hasn't recruited your students as frequently as other firms and they're looking to expand their presence. Maybe they're growing a DC office or they're growing an East Coast office where they really want to start recruiting UVA students. What are some things that you would tell them or advice you would give them to recruit specifically at UVA to engage with your students? But what does that advice look like to you?
Well, I think it would start with just, to the extent you're doing virtual program, like multi-school virtual programming, make sure we've got that information so we can share it with our students so that they can start to go. It might be maybe starting with like a small event where they're going to come down, they're going to give us some sort of kind of an elevator pitch type write-up of the types of things that they're interested in, that they think is their pitch for their firm, and try to get some students to engage in a lunch or a dinner or something like that, starting with something that's, it doesn't have to be a giant splash. It could be a virtual thing, right? Like, we'll try to pull them into a program, or we'll try to find, office hours where they come and meet with students individually. And these chances to find different ways to make engagement so they can start to get kind of some of their anchor tenants. They can start to get someone, and then that person comes back to the school, and especially at a place like this, the buzz among the students is really important. Even for firms that maybe students don't go back to, like you're at a 1L firm, you have a hard decision, you choose a different firm for 2L summer. Like, if you come back and say positive things about the 1L firm, like, that is a plus for the firm's brand. So like, anything that you can do to kind of get a little bit of that brand out through, events, through engagement, that type of thing.
Totally. Awesome.
Our stuff is really more focused though on people talking to each other than it is people talking at people. Like, the surveying we've done on students, and we're going to renew our surveying again this year. It's about 2 years old. It's like they spend 6 hours a day in class. They don't want to sit in a room and have someone talk to them for an hour, right? They want to be able to engage. And that's why we like the virtual makes it a lot easier for the person who really knows about this practice to be able to jump on the line with a few people and talk about what it's like from their desk. And it costs them an hour. Yep. They don't really take 3 planes to get to Charlottesville.
Totally. Yeah. And like you said, virtual has really opened that door to make that as convenient as possible for all parties involved. Okay, Lynn, a question for you. I know this is like a hot topic and everyone on this call really understands the value of investing time and money into your recruiting strategy. Unfortunately, none of us on this call are probably holders of the budget If we were, we'd probably have teams of 100 recruiters at your firm. But as someone who's, you have a pretty incredible career in legal recruiting, what are like your top 2 most influential factors that you've kind of taken to your firm leadership and said, look, here is why we need to expand our summer program, or we need to expand the list of schools that we engage with? Like, what has been the messaging? Because you mentioned being data driven on the attorney side. What does that look like on the firm leadership side? And, what does that conversation look like between you and your firm leadership to get that buy-in?
Yeah, I think, going back to the original question, the top 2 things, I think it's, this is, it's what is a good match? This is what opportunities exist at this school, at this particular school, or what makes the most sense for us, and so we should expend more of our resources, money, technology, people on engaging with X student group everywhere, right? Like, and that might change over time. What is the objective of the firm itself, right? But like, we have this, world-class privacy practice. So we should be engaging with student groups that are focused on that. And doing that, we have this evidence that shows that just doing that will increase, that will engage students. We should look at first gen student groups because there is a lot of intersectionality there across all things. So that's where we should invest it. So it's paying attention to where are the students, looking at the resumes, paying attention to where are the successes, what's on their resume, and then going back and saying, this is where we should do that. And you just have to be really solid in what that is. And when it comes to the school, the data is out there. I've heard people say they have trouble finding the data. The schools are required to report where their students are going and the makeup of their class and all of that. It's in the ABA data, which is on their websites. You can pull that and compare it over time. And so know where their students are going. Are they even going into private practice? What percentage are going to your region, your city, what are the student groups? What is the diversity makeup? What should your expectations be going in? And then just knowing learning about the schools, take a few minutes, meet with career services. You don't have to spend a lot of time with them, learn about them and their culture, and talk to the lawyers that, attended that school. Consider talking to them, even if they went to undergraduate. So you just have to pay attention to those things and then, sort of understand what makes a good match, and start there. So if we want to go to UVA this year for the first time, know why. And it might start with having a conversation with somebody in career services to sort of help you to make that case. We're partners. We're not, we're not working in a vacuum. And so we should be having those conversations and talking with them, on some periodic basis. You're going to run into them at various things, but make an effort to do so and to teach them, to tell them a little bit about your firm and what's changing, what's coming. And they can help you with that too. So it's the 2 things are knowing what the success is, but what could be successful that you might not be using, and what's new. Right. There's new student groups forming all the time, or new opportunities happening. So just be aware of that.
Love that, Lynn. Thank you so much. Hannah, probably running close to time. So just want to pass it off to you if you have any other thoughts here.
Sure. No, I think maybe we can get into some audience questions here. I know some folks had submitted questions throughout. Do we have any more in the Q&A right now?
We actually just had one pop up. So one person says, I've seen the data on which students are going to certain regions, but is there anywhere to see how many students from a given school go to a certain state? So I'm assuming, Kevin, or Lynn, if you want to answer that.
So we do have our like on our website, we have data on where people go in their initial job. We also collect data on, like, for our 1Ls on what markets they're interested in. So if you're in a city and you want to know which of our 1Ls are interested in your city, ask us. And we've collected a list of people who are interested in the city and shared the permission to share their contact information. So we can do that for most cities. We don't generally like we have such kind of big interest in like New York and DC. We usually say if it's New York and DC, like we'll figure out a way to communicate with the whole class. But for any other city in the country, like we've got interest data that we do first, second semester, and we can share with firms that are interested.
So that's a survey that you conduct, Kevin, on your end, that your office does?
Correct.
Got
And
it.
then we have the ultimate, where do people go? And if you want to know like how many people went to a city in a particular summer, we'll tell you that. We're pretty free with data.
Awesome. All right, that's all the questions in Q&A right now. So feel free to add in anything else. Oh, here we go. Can the law school and firm talk about virtual interviewing, especially virtual callbacks, and how they might be utilized moving forward? Will this be the main interviewing platform, or are we seeing more in person in August?
Good question.
So based on the firms that we spoke with, we had a strong majority of firms that would prefer to do the first round virtually, very high numbers. We have a very adamant minority that would like to be in person. So we will be attempting for the first time to run a hybrid program in August. I think, again, like I haven't tried to, Lynn might be able to talk to this more, but I haven't tried to kind of figure this out, but it did seem like most of the callbacks last year, there was a virtual option, which kind of makes sense when people are working. And usually that was paired with the ability of someone before they take an offer to try to get to the firm, if at all possible, to see the place and meet the people and everything, if they hadn't already done that through prior interactions, like going to a reception or something of that nature. I don't think it's going back. Like we're open, like we're indifferent. Like if you'd like to come, we love it when you come. I mean, like we loved live OGI. It was great. I think it's really inconvenient if you're in San Francisco to come here for live OGI. It's pretty inconvenient if you're in New York. So I don't think it's going to change. I think like when time is so precious, the lawyer's time, the recruiter's time. I've just heard from recruiter after recruiter, like this just was a game changer as far as like not having to move all over the country to do this. So we anticipate that we'll probably keep some component of live going for a bit, as long as there's a strong demand for it, but that this will continue to become more and more probably platform based.
I would be interested to know how much of that demand for live OGI is alums or recruiters, because I think it's people want to come back to Charlottesville, right? So whenever that comes up with me, I'm like, you can go to campus. You don't have to go in August. And wouldn't that be delightful to not have to, be in a, hot, humid Charlottesville when no one's actually there except law students and lawyers. But I think when we're talking about the callbacks, we were completely virtual and we offered the opportunity to come in person, but we knew that a lot of those interviews would probably turn virtual because the lawyers aren't necessarily here on the day the students are. I do see it going back to more in person on the callbacks, on the callback side. But offering the option, you have to be open to the option and make sure that the lawyers understand that they should, evaluate everyone the exact same way, regardless of how they do it, because there usually are really legitimate reasons why people might not be able to travel at that time, including the fact that they're still working.
I left off one important point. The students prefer virtual. The time frame when we're doing OGI, not all of them actually have leases in Charlottesville. So we found that like 70 to 80% of the students were out of town, either, wherever they were for their jobs for the summer or back home or whatever it was for OGI. And they found that gave them a lot more flexibility. And so we anticipate that even the folks who come for live OGI could probably have 50 to 70% of the schedule be virtual.
So interesting. Yeah, that's a great bit of information. Lynn, we have several questions coming in hot for you. I think you're data driven, really got a lot of people thinking. So it says, can you please talk about how you're keeping track of touch points with 1Ls during the season in a way that you can easily digest that information during the crazy busy OCI season?
Sure. I'm not being paid by this particular organization, but we are using Flo Recruit for that. And prior to that, there was we had developed a way on my old team to do that through our applicant tracking system, not as successfully. There's also the good old fashioned spreadsheet. You just have to make sure that you're communicating with lawyers that they should communicate with you when they have a touch with a student. Keep track of that, touch somewhere. And then just make sure that you're referring back to it. I think Flo makes it easy. We have an event doesn't have to be an event. Let me just put it that way. And so you can have an event that is not something that students register for. You're putting the students' names in there, putting some notes about who they met. And then when you pull that student up in the future as an applicant, you'll see that that person attended an event. So thank you for making it easy, Flo Recruit team. I had an advantage in that we were an early adopter to Flo Recruit during live before 2019. And so have had a little bit more time to think about that and use it for live. So anytime we're on campus, we're setting up that event, even if it's a school driven or we're driving it. So we have all of those touches.
Yeah, awesome. Love that. We are not paying Lynn, we promise.
We also ask the students. So post interview season, you should ask them, when did you meet us? Who did you meet? And then you combine all those things, and that's how you get the information.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, I know we're kind of running close to time, but these are really good questions. So I'll keep firing these questions off. Do you expect to see more rising 2L receptions in person this summer? Is that the trend and the pattern that we're seeing in the industry at large?
We're definitely seeing a trend toward more in-person receptions. It's interesting, like our data the last time suggested that is not the favored vehicle for all students in this generation, and that's a growing percentage, and we're going to, like I said, renew that. But certainly over the summer, I think there's an argument. If you have, I think we know that there are in our major cities groups of students who go around to the different events and everything. I think during the school year it's harder because they've got classes and it's hours out and finding a place to park and all those things. So we're getting more pushback to that than we used to. But during the summer, I think that Lynn can talk to this too, but I think my guess is it'll be more in person.
Yeah, I mean, there was home for the holidays. I saw all kinds of home for the holidays receptions happening over the holidays, and those were in person. So I imagine that the summer will be more reception heavy. Yep. And I think we saw that on the NALP summit. Things are returning back to 2019 from a data perspective. So I think behaviors will as well.
Got it. Quick question, Kevin, for you. You said that students preferred virtual, the virtual screener interviews, that first round of interviews. Is that the same for callbacks? Like, did they also appreciate that callbacks were virtual if there was some maybe in-person element to that?
So the students aren't monolithic on any question, but there is more unanimity on the screener because of the logistics of it, because of the trickiness of being in Charlottesville if your lease hasn't started and that type of thing, and the convenience of not, classes don't start for a few weeks. And so for a lot of them, it is more convenient to travel to callbacks from home than it is from Charlottesville, right? It's just easier. If you're in the New York area and you're going to be interviewing in New York, you can take a train into town or something like that. So I think it's less, I think there's more of a split on callbacks. But it's not unanimous on screeners. Some students just like in-person interaction, but there's definitely a large plurality or majority that likes the virtual better for the screeners.
Totally. Yep.
In our
Got it. Cool. So there's a couple more questions, but I know that we're about to reach the end of the hour. So I actually just took a screenshot of them so that we can answer potentially in a follow-up email, because I think they're really great questions. Hannah, should we go on to the key takeaways and then wrap up?
Sure. Please forgive any lag. It happened. I lost power, but on a hot spot.
Oh, no.
So can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, AT&T. All right, so some key takeaways for us. Just want to try to sum up all of the thoughts today. Let's see. Courtney, I think you were going to speak to early engagement. Is that right?
Yep. So seeing this as an opportunity, like I had mentioned before, to engage with students before OCIs, it's really exciting that students are able to have so many different touch points with firms than they ever were before. So before the pressure of the application, filling out all of that information, they're truly getting to know your firm culture and your mission behind your firm and make a really informed decision. Like Kevin said, a lot more informed than he was able to make whenever he was in law school. Our hope is that this results in higher retention rates in the long run of your attorneys. And also, I know there's some stress behind who all is going to accept the offer that I extend. So hopefully having a little bit increased transparency in that, understanding if you've had that many touch points, you have a little bit better of an understanding of what, if they're going to accept that offer and work at your firm. Lynn had mentioned this about recruiting strategies deserving some reevaluation. I know the word reevaluation probably triggers some negative things for some people, but I think it's really important to understand that one size does not fit all. Recruiting at UVA might not work for recruiting at NYU, for example. Every school is different. Obviously, every candidate is different. Just as your firm has culture and nuance, so do law schools. So just being mindful of how you are, customizing your recruiting plan at these schools, and make sure you're kind of reevaluating, checking in your recruiting efforts in order to ensure that your process is not only effective for your recruiting goals and meeting those goals, but is also effective for the students at that law school as well. So just being mindful of that going forward as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I wanted to add in here this idea of transparency. I feel like has come up in a lot of conversations recently, in that if timelines are shifting, let's talk about it. Let's be direct with each other on new timelines and touch points. So, for example, if your firm is going to be interviewing early, letting the schools know that, so that end goal students understand where their opportunities lie and what they need to be doing if they want to be at a certain firm. And the Career Services Office is able to have full context to advise on that. So I think Kevin and Lynn both referenced the partnership there. And it makes a lot of sense to be communicating heavily now in a period where there's a little less consistency, a little less standardization around when and how things are happening. And then finally, needing a strong system to make this all happen. I think I sadly missed Lynn's system conversation. I caught the tail end of it. But we definitely believe that having a platform built for event management, engagement logging, pre-application candidate logs, so you can actually take into account how many times have I talked to this candidate? Do they have touch points with me pre-interview? And to Kevin's point, getting that funnel for yourself of who does it make sense to interview early, who already knows my firm, and who do my attorneys already say that they think is a really strong candidate. All of that is supported by having a place that's easy to put everything and where as much of it is automated as possible. Anything to add to that, Lynn and Kevin? We'd love your final thoughts as well. Cover the bases?
Nope.
Cover the bases.
Yep, you covered the bases.
All right. Well, I think we're over time, so we'll wrap it up then. Thank you guys so much again for being with us in the great conversation. Thank you everyone for joining. Feel free to scan this QR code if you'd like to continue the conversation with Flo Recruit. It'll take you to a calendar page where you're welcome to book a meeting with us, whether it's a demo of how our platform allows you to track pre-recruiting and student engagement pre-interviews, or just to talk about what we're seeing in the industry. We're always happy to do so. Like Courtney mentioned, we'll maybe send out an email with some thoughts on those questions we didn't get to. But otherwise, hope everyone has a great day. Stay warm if you're in Austin. And Courtney, I might be coming over to your house now.
Come on over. The twins will love to see you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.